You're listening to the Travis Makes Money podcast presented by GoHighLevel.com. For a free 30-day trial of the best all-in-one digital marketing software tool on the planet, just go to GoHighLevel.com/Travis. What's going on, money makers? Welcome back to another episode of the Travis Makes Money podcast, where it's our mission to help you make more money. Today on the show, we're releasing snippets from my conversation with Donald Miller that I had over on my other podcast, Travis Makes Friends. If you want to hear the full conversation, you can go over, search Travis Makes Friends, or if you listen to podcasts and find that full episode. This was one of my, honestly, most enjoyable conversations I've had on the show. And I've talked to a lot of really great people recently, but I think with Don, we just got along from the very beginning. I had him on the show a few years back when Building a StoryBrand first came out. And something we talked about in the episode was how he got his book to sell over 1 million copies since it came out in 2018. So we mainly talk a lot about business. So what we decided to do was basically take snippets from that conversation that had to do with money, making money, business, writing books, things like that would apply to this topic of the show over on Travis Makes Money. So expect to hear some of the things that Donald doesn't really talk about on a lot of other content that he puts out there, because we went all over the place in this conversation. But it is one of the episodes that I actually listened to the full thing this morning while I was doing my workout and got stuff from it, even listening to it, even though I was the one who had the conversation. So I expect that you'll be taking a lot from this conversation and probably want to go check out the full episode over on Travis Makes Friends. So yeah, Donald Miller is the author of Building a StoryBrand, which is one of the most widely accepted business branding books of all time. He's now done consulting for major Fortune 500 companies, also did some consulting for the NSA, and we actually talk about that in the episode itself. So there's a wealth of knowledge that you can gain from Don and using his StoryBrand framework to help inside of your company. There's a company specifically that we talk about that increased their revenue 100%, well, it's like 98% or something like that, just by implementing a small tagline into their business. So we talk a little bit about the future of AI, what that means for businesses, and how you can use that in your branding. And really, man, we just go all over the place in this one. So enjoy this snippet from my conversation with Donald Miller. And if you want to listen to the full episode, be sure to go to check it out on the Travis Makes Friends podcast. Without further ado, here's my chat with Donald Miller. How much work do I need to do now at becoming a better storyteller if AI is taking a lot of the heavy lifting off of my plate? Like what's left for what should I be spending my time improving in my skill set to be a better storyteller, assuming that AI is going to be doing a lot of this stuff for us in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I mean, 5 and 10 years, that may be true. Right now, I don't think it's as good of a storyteller as even a okay storyteller.
Sure.
It's good at like taking complicated ideas and writing them into a letter that you're going to send to somebody. I think story and story structure, it's just not quite there. You've still got to revise it and rewrite it pretty darn well. But you can actually type in a bunch of stuff and say, run this through Blake Snyder's beat sheet, run this through Donald Miller's StoryBrand, run this through Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, whatever it is, and give me kind of bullet points, and then sort of write over the top of it. So it's very, very good at the dirty, rough draft.
Yeah.
But that's not where the genius lives. The genius lives in the details, right? It's good at painting the walls, but none of the trim has been done. The carpet hasn't been done.
Yeah.
And everything is in those little details. So I would actually say it just saves you a lot of time. But what's going to happen is the genius is the people who are really, really effective and good writers, you still have to get in there and get the details, all the details right, and how it flows has to be right. And it can't sound like AI.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like, but the hardest part to me is not the writing. The hardest part is not the rewriting, it's the writing.
Yeah.
And so some ways it actually gives you the writing up front, and then you go back and you rewrite it.
Kind of gives you a direction.
It gives you a really, really great direction. But, I would expect that as writers start to use AI as writing companions, that our books are going to be a lot better.
Yeah.
However, you're going to be able to see very, very quickly the overwhelming majority of books were actually just written by AI, and the person who was in control of the process didn't have an eye for quality, and so they're releasing this book that's just not very good. And people eventually they're just not going to even trust books anymore because AI is just writing all of them.
Yeah, well, in a sea of volume, the quality rises to the top. So if AI increases output of reading materials by 10x in the next year or whatever, that doesn't mean that they're going to be good.
No.
And so like the people who still are the writers who understand the difference between good and bad are still probably going to be the ones rising.
Well, and you're
going
to have to work twice as hard to go in there and say, hey, on this Act 2 transition, I don't like the all is lost moment here. Could it be a little bit more emotional? And you're going to be dialing that in. Well, at the end of the day, you probably work just as hard as if you would have written it.
Yeah.
It's just you got more torque.
Yeah, it was interesting. I started writing a book recently, my first one. I just was trying to knock out one chapter. And so knocked out one chapter on a flight one time, 3-4 hours, tried to, give it a really solid effort. And then afterwards I was contemplating, how do I use AI to kind of help me this? Cause it never felt natural to me. Whenever I told AI to write something, kind of what you're saying is like, I could just tell like, that's not me. And that doesn't feel genuine to who I am. That's not how I would say that.
Yeah.
And so what I did is that there's this ChatGPT extension that was called like Creative Writing Coach or something like that. And so I copied my entire chapter that I wrote from Google Docs and pasted it. And then it acts as a coach and like walks through each of the things that I did and it gave me a bunch of great feedback about the things that I did really, really well. And then also like gave me really great feedback on what I could improve. And that felt much more natural to me because it was like, oh, well, it said that. It was like, this piece of this story that you're telling is really great, but you need to sit in the emotion more. Like you have a joke in the part where that's like super serious, maybe cut that joke out and let the seriousness and the gravity of that moment stick with the reader better.
That is so good.
It was like, ooh, this actually could be super helpful writing.
No, very, very helpful. And at the end of the day, the reader gets better value.
Yes.
Right. That's what we're all looking for. We're looking for a better reader experience. So I think the lazy and the hardworking are still going to be obvious.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's always how it
still
goes,
going to be very, very obvious that you did not try. You mailed it in.
Yeah.
And you had AI do it for you.
Well, it's kind of similar to like if you tried to have AI, if you're not a coder and you have AI write a bunch of code, it's like you don't know if it's good or not. Like I would look at that and go like, yeah, it looks good to me. It's like when I pop the hood of my truck when something's going wrong and then pretend like I know what I'm looking at. You know what I mean? I just kind of like fiddle with some things, like put the dipstick up and down and go like, yeah, it looks okay. You know what I mean? Like I should probably take this into a mechanic.
That's about right. Yeah.
The expertise is still going to come into play. So as storytellers,
well, but we all as professionals need to switch our minds into being able to use and embrace and engage AI. Your kids need to be using AI to do their homework. They really do. In fact, I'm on an advisory board called the Future Us, the Future United States. And it was, I don't know if it still is, but it was the board that was the dominant consult to Congress, who at the time they'd only passed one piece of legislation on AI, which is crazy.
That is insane.
Miles Taylor wrote it, and he's head of the Future Us. But what they say is education institutions are trying to crack down on AI. Universities and stuff are saying, hey, you can't use AI. And we've got all this software that helps us know whether you used AI. And he said that's the exact wrong direction.
Yeah. That
in China, what they're actually teaching all the kids to do is to use AI.
Exactly.
And that's like teaching mathematicians not to use calculators. Well, you're going to be stuck in really –
right.
No, they've got to know how to use it now. And it'll be interesting to see whether we lose the ability to sort of write or think. But then if I'm telling AI, hey, I need this to be more compassionate or whatever, and then it prints out a different version of it and it's more compassionate and I read it, maybe I just learned to do that myself. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see.
It's an interesting quandary because I've thought about that from that perspective where as soon as ChatGPT came out, kids were using it for their homework immediately.
Right.
And then it was obviously immediately met with this like, how are we going to prevent kids from, cheating on their homework or using this for...
Well, you can quiz them to see if they actually understand what they just turned in.
That's also very true. Yeah, exactly. But also it was like but if this is completely capable technology, should we not be embracing whatever that next evolution is?
Listen, you don't have
they don't teach
choice.
penmanship anymore.
It's not a matter of should you embrace it. You don't have a choice.
Yeah. Right.
This is not something in which we have a choice. This is here, and the good can far outweigh the bad. The problem with the bad that AI can do is it can give bad actors tools to do really bad things in a really big hurry.
Sure,
it's going to help people make chemical weapons in their garage.
Right.
And so that's the negative side of it. But almost everything else is extremely positive. They've already trained AI to look at like 10,000 scans of people's lungs before they were diagnosed with lung cancer. So imagine 10,000 scans of lungs years before, like eight years later, diagnosed with lung cancer.
Wow.
Okay, we'll go back and get their scans from 8 years ago. Or how far back can we go to look at their lungs before they ever had lung cancer? And AI with like 90% efficacy is now seeing lung cancer before a human can.
Wow.
And so I'm just like, okay, this is life-saving technology. So the fact that we would be afraid of it, I understand why people would be afraid of it, but we do need to engage it. And I also think, look, and I'm working on a book now that, well, it's a book that comes out of sort of national security and the stuff we've done there on, look, what are the consistent characteristics of an autocrat on the rise? What do they do?
Yeah.
And literally it'll tell me about autocrats I didn't even know existed. I'm like, well, I got to go look into that guy.
The depth of the knowledge that it has.
Yeah. And here's how they did it. Here's how, they all have a utopian vision. They all want control. They all control by force. They all kill their political enemies. They all, on and on. So you can it can do weeks worth of research in minutes. And I think, so hopefully there's going to be, that this will be part of the knowledge explosion. Which is usually very helpful to all of us. But it requires change. And if you're not willing to change, it's going to be tough because you will get left behind. Every
piece of new technology is met with that resistance at first. Even all the way back to steam engines and using coal for power versus, and I've read this great book from Douglas Brunt called The Mysterious Case of Rudolf Diesel. And it's about Rudolf Diesel, who invented the diesel engine.
I had no idea that this guy's, that was a last name.
Honestly, read the book.
Okay.
I know you're a big fan of
The
Mysterious Case of Rudolf
Diesel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very well written. I enjoyed it a lot. I typically am more of like a nonfiction reader, more like self-help, educational, business books, stuff like that. This was one of the first ones that I picked up that was more essentially a biography of the guy who invented the diesel engine. But it was incredible just to read about the resistance that he faced with a game-changing piece of technology that quite literally was the difference between winning and losing World War II, with the German U-boats and things like that. It's a fascinating read, to say the least. And so it's called The Mysterious Case of Rudolf Diesel because nobody actually technically knows what happened to him. He disappeared in this boat ride, but the prevailing theory, not to give it all away, is that Winston Churchill employed him to help the British come up with a way to combat the German U-boats because their diesel technology was so far ahead, because Rudolf Diesel was a German engineer. And so their diesel technology was so far ahead of everybody else's, so the English Armada didn't stand a chance compared to the German U-boats because they were all underneath the surface of the water, so they couldn't see them. Yeah. And the diesel engine was the only way to be able to make these submarines actually work
for long periods of time.
Right. So they were struggling for months and months and months to try to come up with their own version of this technology, never could do it. And all of a sudden Rudolf Diesel disappears off of the coast of England. And then 9 months later, the British just start pumping out. Pumping
sounds
out
almost like the atomic bomb story.
Yeah, it's super, super interesting. But I'd recommend the read. But all that to say that like every piece of new technology takes a long time for people to just accept that there's change coming.
Yeah.
And the internet was a massive explosion in that type of resistance because of how game-changing it was. And AI is seemingly going to be an amplified version of even what the internet was, which was already an amplified version of what previous technology was.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think we can even dream. They say the event horizon, pre-industrial revolution was about 100 years out. In other words, 100, you can see for the next 100 years where we're going.
Sure.
And the industrial revolution shrunk it to 50 years or whatever. They say AI shrinks the event horizon, literally, that you cannot predict the future after 2 years. That is absolutely insane.
I believe it. And the only thing that's left is
no idea.
an increase in computation power, you know, which the quantum computing people are making some headway in that. And AI is only going to help bring that technology about faster anyway.
Yeah,
so,
it's going to make everything faster.
Yeah, it's going to be wild to see this. I mean, like I've always thought of, especially technology, the internet and everything like that, as like this hockey stick growth that's happened in the last like 2-3 decades. But that hockey stick is nothing compared to what the hockey stick of like AI and quantum computing married together, what they're going to be able to bring about, which is going to be some pretty insane stuff.
When you think about it, it's impossible for us, like 10 years from now, it's impossible for us to know what the world looks like or what exists. Like what are the ramifications of this in like professional sports? What are the ramifications of this in managing our money? Like what if AI is managing everybody's stocks? Where does the chaos go? Where does you know what I mean? Like where does that go? And it's really insane.
Yeah, no kidding. But in the meantime, we're using it to build better stories for our businesses, you know? Sell more.
I'll give you a good tagline.
Yeah, exactly. Which, StoryBrand.ai. If you want to get a tagline generated for your business through the StoryBrand framework, then StoryBrand.ai.